Okay. Are you all seeing the slide presentation again? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So thanks to everyone who is joining us. I'm Angela Story. I'm the director of the Braden Institute for Social Justice Research, a part of the College of Arts and Sciences here at the University of Louisville. Thank you all so very much for joining us. I know that right now only Sarah and Matt and I have the capability to do exciting things like speak or present. But later on, after they've finished their presentation around 12:40, we will allow folks to ask questions. You can raise your hand and then we'll turn on mics and such so we can have a bit of a conversation. So stick with us till then, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to be hearing from two excellent folks who I feel very privileged to know. Sarah Pierce, who's the Housing and Energy Affordability Coordinator for the Metropolitan Housing Coalition, located here in Louisville, also an alumni of the University of Louisville Sustainability Master's Program, and Dr. Nathaniel O'Grady, who's an Associate Professor, Senior Lecturer in Disasters at the University of Manchester. And they will both be speaking about their research on connected topics. And the topic of today's talk will be Housing, Utility Costs, and Climate Justice in Louisville, Applied Research on Rising Risks. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to them. Yeah, thanks so much for being here.
All right. Thank you so much. So very happy to be here. Like Dr. Story said, I am with the Metropolitan Housing Coalition. MHC is a coalition of more than 300 individual and organizational members who engage on research-based advocacy for fair, accessible, and affordable housing here in Louisville. We do this through research. You may have heard of our State of Metropolitan Housing reports. We also just came out with a utility affordability report, which we will touch later in this conversation. But I oversee our housing and energy affordability program called Every Home, which is dedicated to bridging the gap between affordable housing and affordable utilities. And we do this through education and outreach. And go to the next slide.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Angela, again for the invitation, and Sarah for joining me on doing this presentation today. So I'm Nathaniel O'Grady. I'm an associate professor in disasters and geography at the University of Manchester in the UK. My department is called Humanitarian Conflict Response Institute. I've put a little plug up for them here, basically because they pay me and probably expect me to do so. But what HCRI is really about is cutting edge research into kind of a myriad different kind of humanitarian issues, disasters, and public health research too. I've kind of got a background in working on disasters and their relationship to kind of climate change, in effect, and how climate change is changing the way that disasters and emergencies take place, and what implications this has for governance as well. For my part, I guess this presentation, today is part of a kind of broader research project that explores the effects of urban planning on people's vulnerability to different to heat waves, in effect, specifically in Louisville. So to be more specific, the project really kind of explores how planning has kind of shaped how planning has kind of afforded people with different levels of access to basic infrastructure, and the way this kind of access shapes their kind of lived experiences of heat waves, and in combination with the wonderful research that Sarah does at MHC. I'm going to try and unpack some of the elements of this project today, specifically in relation to housing. Angela, would we be able to go over to the next slide? So Sarah and I have kind of been conspiring, to develop this this presentation over a couple of weeks, I suppose, and we managed to kind of cook up a structure where we kind of we kind of weaved our slides together. So the talk really is a kind of amalgamation of the different research interests that Sarah and MHC have. And those interests that I have, looking both at housing inequality and how its impact on people facing facing increasingly turbulent environmental events with a changing climate. And we've kind of structured the talk according to kind of 4 overall sections. So first, I want to give a kind of brief historical overview of housing quality and housing provision in Louisville, stretching back to the 19th century, but still very brief, even though it's a long period of time. Then I'll hand over to Sarah to give a kind of overview of the work that she and MHC more broadly do on kind of utility burden in Louisville. And then I'll go back to my own work to try to show how these kind of issues related to a utility burden impact people's ability to weatherize their homes during heat waves and the consequences this kind of the weatherization capabilities or incapabilities have on people's health in effect, and the health risks that emerge because of a lack of weatherization, I suppose, which is really linked to utility burden that Sarah talked to. And then Sarah will conclude with some policy recommendations as well. I don't know if is there anything missing from that, Sarah, before I go in?
No, that sounds good.
Grand. Okay, cool. Well, if we could have the next, yeah, okay. So I was just telling Sarah and Angela, these are the pictures that you see here from a housing archive at Harvard, and they're actual houses that existed in Louisville in the late 19th century. And what I think they really bring to light, and the kind of connections that I want to kind of build to these pictures really, is that neither utility burden nor its connection to climate risks can be understood outside of the context of urban planning processes, which have kind of shaped Louisville over time. And I think in this part of the presentation, I kind of really want to do 2 things. So firstly, I want to suggest that these urban planning processes have fundamentally organized housing stock quality and its uneven provision amongst Louisvillians today. And I don't know if I've actually invented the word Louisvillians either, or it's an actual term that you all use. I'm not sure. But anyway, secondly, these urban planning processes, are highly political, and they reflect the kind of broader power relations that have kind of punctuated any moment in Louisville's history too. So I kind of know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but urban planning throughout the 20th century figured as a key mechanism through which to enact racial segregation and primarily ensure that the city's infrastructure, Louisville's infrastructure, served predominantly the interests of white people. These urban planning processes directly feed into the present. This is my kind of claim. So owing to historical kind of indifferences, housing stock in the majority Black West Louisville is now in the top 2% worst for housing quality in the country by some projections. But even before, notable changes related to what's called white flight happened. And at a time when Louisville was at least geographically integrated racially, housing conditions amongst white and Black communities were kind of radically uneven, even at that time. So as far back as 1880, the Courier Journal was reporting that housing inhabited by the Black community was for the most part dangerous, adding that, quote, ventilation and sanitary regulations are totally neglected. So even at this early stage in the kind of urban development of Louisville, we see these kind of growing differences in housing conditions on racialized lines. So if you have the next slide, that would be great. Yeah, so these pictures are actually from Louisville's University of Louisville's own archive that you can see here. So, of course, We now recognise that such conditions, such housing conditions, were the result of landlord exploitation and municipal neglect. But at the time, in the 19th century, they were framed as the product of racialized tropes of laziness and hedonism. And a key proponent of racialized caricatures such as this was Harlan Bartholomew, whose kind of influence, I'm sure a lot of you know, in the city only expanded in the early and mid 20th century with his study, The Negro Problem in Louisville, which came to directly inform the city's deployment of federal funds for so-called urban renewal programs, which lasted between the 1940s and 1970s. Now, urban renewal, as again, I'm sure most of you know, completely changed urban landscape across the United States. And as in many cities across the United States, urban renewal is mostly known for the creation of white flight suburbs and the evisceration of black neighborhoods to facilitate white suburbanization. And when it comes specifically to housing, I think two processes as they pertain to black communities in Louisville are particularly important in relation to urban renewal of the 40s and 70s. Firstly, as traditional black neighborhoods were raised to create parking lots so that this new suburbanite class could access downtown, the former inhabitants of these areas were displaced en masse to the public housing recently vacated by this new suburban white class. Secondly, the black population in the city actually grew massively during and after the Second World War as the Great Migration from the South entered what's commonly known as its second phase. So I think that these two processes of urban renewal are like crucially important to understanding housing stock and conditions in Louisville now. The housing to which the black community were displaced during urban renewal was already in a state of dilapidation when they moved in, having been declared unfit for purpose for the white communities that had recently left. And with the arrival of more black people from the South during the second phase of the Great Migration, population density in these areas increased. As of course the new arrivals were confined to these areas as well. And with increased density in these areas, further strain was placed on all infrastructure in these neighborhoods, including housing, but also all other kinds of infrastructure that housing relies upon. Now, some of the housing issues that were created through segregation could have been attended to by government interventions in the later 20th century, but they weren't for myriad different reasons. So we see these kind of growing segregationist kind of inequalities that emerge between the 40s and 70s, and then there's government programs to kind of address those inequalities. Louisville receives a lot of money to try to address those inequalities and then just doesn't do it whatsoever. So in 1975, Louisville received a large community block grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. But a compliance report from the same year shows that basically all the funds were used to improve white housing, demurring on the kind of fund's explicit purpose of enhancing integration. And then even later, there's obviously more kind of attempts to address kind of housing inequality. So while the later Hope 6 project did enhance housing quality in West Louisville, it also increased public-private ownership models for social housing, which have complicated maintenance requests in the here and now. So in the paper connected to this talk, which I've just submitted to the Journal of Urban Affairs, I show how Hope 6 really put public housing in Louisville on a more kind of rentier model that's deeply affected the upkeep of homes now. And I'll kind of go into maintenance a bit later, talking about house weatherization. Yeah, so this is of course like a really selective historical context to housing stock and housing quality in Louisville. And I want to just hand over to Sarah now to discuss utility burden as it exists within this broader historical context. So Sarah, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Nat. So I'm going to bring us here to the present and just talk a little bit about utility affordability and utility burdens. This may be a new term to some, but affordable utilities is the ability to warm and cool your home, to have hot or cold water, breathable air, lighting, cooking areas, all free of water damage and mold, but at a price to where that you are not sacrificing other essentials such as medicine or food. You may have heard that there is a rule of thumb for housing. You never want to spend more than 30% of your income on housing, or else you're considered housing cost burdened. There is also a similar rule of thumb for energy and water bills. So for energy bills, you should be spending no more than 6% of your income per month. And for waste and wastewater bills, a combined no more than 4.5%. If you are spending over this percentage, you are considered utility cost burdened. And a lot of people will, like I was mentioning earlier, try to pay their energy bills or their water bills in lieu of other essentials such as medication, school, transportation, and food. Next slide. And so we detail all of this in a new report that we just came out with a couple of weeks ago at this point. We partnered with the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance to write a report called Affordability Beyond the Rent, the Utility Burdens and the True Cost of Housing here in Louisville, Kentucky. So this report is all kinds of really useful data that is specific to Louisville that many other organizations will be able to use when working on their own utility affordability programs. So at the beginning of the conversation, when I was talking about MHC, I was mentioning that MHC works towards affordable housing, and we do a lot of research reports on that. Specifically our State of Metropolitan Housing Report that we come out with every year. But something that, and we have been working on utility issues for many decades, but a year and a half ago, we launched our Every Home program, where we make a statement that to have fair, accessible, and affordable housing, you have to have the energy and water that it takes to thrive in those homes. So, of course, without affordable utilities, you could not have affordable housing. We intervene on important Public Service Commission cases, specifically with LG&E and KU, making sure that low-income residents are represented in these conversations, and that we try to keep the utilities accountable for having affordable rates. So that is the driving force behind this report, is to ensure that we have Louisville-based data so that we can see the full picture, so that we know what changes need to be made. Next slide. So I'll first talk about energy insecurity before we get to water. If you look at this map here, you can see the average energy burden for all households in the state of Jefferson County. All of the red and pink that you see is concentrated to Northwest Louisville, where we see a lot of other high rates of low-income populations, people of color populations, single mother head of household, a lot of different factors that can play into that energy burden as well. So about 1 in 3 households in Kentucky face energy insecurity, so spending more than 6% of their monthly income on energy costs. And we rank 9th in the US for the highest amount of energy burdens. But in Louisville specifically, about 18% or 57,000 households face those high energy burdens of more than 6% each month. For those who are just moderate income, the average burden is about 8%. So imagine 8% of your monthly paycheck that you have is going only directly toward energy pricing, not including rent, water, food, childcare, transportation, all of the other costs associated with just basic living. And our lowest income residents, as you can see in the darkest red colors in the northwest core of Louisville, have a burden of 16% or more. So 16% of their paycheck is going toward energy bills. Next slide. Water insecurity is just about the same. As you can see, the entire Jefferson County, not one of it is white. It has a shade of blue connected to it, meaning that there is energy burden and water burdens all across Jefferson County. Louisville ranks the 20th in the US for highest water-related expenses. But I wanted to emphasize that wastewater service is much higher than water. I know, with a combined bill, sometimes it's hard to parcel that out. But typically, wastewater services are a lot more expensive because it is easier to provide water than take water that is used and clean it, so it can go back into the system. But 60% of a typical wastewater bill is just fixed charges and not the actual amount of water that you are using. So at a normal usage, about 17.7% of Louisville residents, which is right about the same for energy burden as well, are water cost burdened. So that means that they are spending more than 4.5% of their monthly income on water and wastewater charges. So combined, if you are spending more than 10.5% on utilities, which I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you all, but that if you're spending more than 10.5%, you are considered extremely utility cost burdened. And as you can see, this is also contrasted down to the northwest core of Louisville. Next slide. So the question is, why are they so high? Nat mentioned it a little bit earlier about the quality of housing that we have. I typically refer to utility burdens with 4 factors. It could be based on geographic location, your socioeconomic situation, the types of energy prices and policies within your region, and housing characteristics. And for the sake of this conversation, I am going to focus on housing characteristics, which we call a building envelope. A building envelope is that envelope between the inside of your home and the outside environment. So if you have a poor building envelope, that could mean that you have a window or a door that is leaking your hot air or your cool air. You have poor insulation. Maybe you have a lot of windows that aren't always covered and they could be heating up the inside of your home during the summer. So the type, age, and building envelope of your home can affect the energy bill and the water bill that you have. A lot of older homes have leaking pipes, which can contribute to higher water bills as well. If you look at this map here, again, it's kind of concentrated toward the central to northwest core of Jefferson County. Those are where all of the houses built pre-1960 tend to be. So 72% of our homes in Louisville, they have a poor building envelope. So they are going to be harder to heat, harder to cool. You're going to have increased energy cost and water costs associated with pipe leakage and leakage of warm and hot air. Next slide. So how does that affect us physically and mentally? This is something that a lot of people struggle with if they are living in an older home and they don't have a very strong building envelope. It can not only affect them physically through different health effects such as carbon monoxide poisoning, lead exposure, asthma, COPD, hypothermia, heat stress. It can also affect people mentally, especially if they are considering what we call the heat, eat, or treat dilemma, which is where people have to decide, am I going to pay my energy bill, or am I going to pay for the food needed for my family or the medications that we need? And a lot of people will pay their energy bill before they purchase food or medications. Almost everything that we do in day-to-day life requires energy. And so without it, it can affect people's mobility, ability to get to work, to school, to be able to do homework, to cook. And so most people will pay for that energy bill before they pay for anything else. This also affects us mentally. We have the stress of trying to figure out if we can pay for our energy bill, the stress of now, my child has been exposed to lead in the home. This can cause a lot of mental stress and depression, and it will affect us financially as well, of trying to weatherize our homes or fix these issues. But most importantly, trying to keep up with that energy or wastewater bill that comes every month. Next slide. Oh, actually, if we could go back one. Yeah, sorry. This map, I forgot to mention, it is one of our executive directors, Tony Curtis's favorite map. And this shows the life expectancy in Jefferson County. As you can see, in the east portion of Jefferson County, most people have a life expectancy of 78 to 82 years old, whereas the west portion of Louisville, even specifically the northwest core, we're looking at a life expectancy that is almost 15 years less, between the ages of 69 and 71. And that has a lot to do with the buildings and the homes that we're living in, the physical stress and mental stress that causes for us. Now we could go to the next slide. So I wanted to put this more into perspective of all of those percentages that I was throwing at you all. So I'd like you to imagine a Louisville minimum wage worker who is working $7.25 an hour, which, by the way, has not changed or increased since 2009. They would have to work 19 and a half hours to pay for one typical energy bill, and they would have to work 9 hours to pay associated sewer bills and 4.5 hours to pay for their water bill. All in all, that is almost an entire week's worth of pay. And that is out of the entire month. And this, of course, doesn't cover fluctuation in extremely hot months during the summer or extremely cold months, when we may see like pipes freezing or our energy costs going up as the weather gets colder outside. So putting that into perspective, maybe 6% doesn't seem like a lot each month, but that adds up, especially for our low-income communities who are spending almost 18% of their income on just utility costs before anything else. Go to the next slide. And I'll pass it back to Nat.
Great. Thanks very much, Sarah. Yeah, I think that what Sarah's detailed so well there is something that relates really well to the work that I'm doing on heat waves in Louisville, because when it comes to kind of climate change related events like heat waves, the utility burden that Sarah's documented so well here matters a lot, because it limits and shapes how people can weatherize their homes. So what I mean, by weatherization is kind of the ability of people to adapt and adjust to climate fluctuations that we're seeing more and more of now, and to adjust to those fluctuations through the kind of infrastructural technologies that run through their homes, including energy supply, heating and cooling technologies, water supply as well, and devices like insulation as well. Insulation being something that is like gradually wearing down as well, as like the older the homes get. And so in my own work, I've been thinking about weatherization and thinking about it in the context of a lot of what Sarah's been talking about in terms of utility burden and like the historical development of housing stock as well. And I've kind of come to the conclusion, or really I want to advocate for an understanding of weatherization as something not simply, not like weatherization doesn't simply refer to the existence of, different kind of technologies whereby we might adjust our homes to climate fluctuation, but people's access and ability to use these technologies in their day-to-day lives. So weatherization isn't a kind of state, but an active process that people engage in. So rather than a kind of property, that people have, because of the material things, at their disposal, weatherization is more of a kind of capability that people possess to varying degrees, owing to urban planning processes. So people's capability to weatherize depends on a range of different factors. And, as Sarah's already, shown so well, a main factor behind this capability to weatherize is, of course, kind of affordability and, the uneven distribution of affordability across the city as well. But I think also weatherization is also kind of contingent on the different institutional relations that orchestrate housing provision and housing kind of quality too now. So, and what I mean by this is the different kinds of institutional actors that are kind of behind and coordinate housing provision in Louisville. So one of the things that, my historical kind of investigations into housing kind of revealed was that since the 90s, you've had this range of reforms in housing provision whereby municipal government has moved, mostly from owning public housing and, providing quite a lot of public housing in places like Northwest Louisville and West Louisville, to a more kind of rentier model where private companies manage housing. And what we've seen with that, like in my own research, is like growing issues with the ability to for people in houses to upgrade and maintain the necessary technologies for kind of weatherization. And this is something that's really increased since we've moved to this kind of rentier kind of model of housing. But there's, I think these institutional relations don't just operate at a kind of local scale, but they're also they operate at different scales as well. So a lot of the maintenance issues that feature in houses in West Louisville are actually kind of dependent on broader issues at kind of state legislature level as well. So there's been a lot of movements towards trying to ensure that landlords are more responsible for weatherizing homes in West Louisville. A lot of these kind of policy movements and legal kind of moves have been shut down basically at both kind of city and state level. So at the same time, as I think it's really important to think about affordability when it comes to weatherization, it's also really important to think about these new kind of institutional relations as well, because I think this kind of opens us up to thinking about who should be responsible for weatherization and what it would mean to be kind of responsible for weatherization and the kind of politics behind this as well. So if we can move to the next slide. So yeah, on one hand, I'm really interested in kind of processes of weatherization and what shapes those processes. What are the kind of power relations behind processes of weatherization. But I also think the language of kind of capability, like the capability to weatherize, is important because it also opens up to exploration the kind of consequences attached to not being able to weatherize as well. So what kind of risks, specifically health risks, emerge if people can't weatherize their homes? And I think that, Sarah spoke a little bit about eat, treat, or heat before. And this is like, definitely something that I've seen come up time and time again in the kind of interviews and ethnographic kind of work that I've done a little bit of in public housing in Louisville. too. So, you know, and it fits into kind of broader set of issues about the kinds of risk that are most prominent where people can't weatherize their homes during heat waves. So up to this point, you know, this research is still kind of ongoing. But up to this point, my research is kind of concentrated on three different kinds of risks associated with heat waves and people's inability to weatherize their homes during heat waves. So the first is how a kind of lack of weatherization capabilities exacerbates risks associated with pre-existing health issues that people might have. So some of you will remember that in 2024, the Manor public housing complex suffered a temporary shutdown in energy supply. Manor, for those that don't know, is mainly populated by elderly residents. And these elderly residents, during the energy supply shutdown, couldn't get access to CPAP machines, machines which they actually relied upon. You really rely upon during kind of hotter temperatures when kind of breathability levels are reduced as well. So you see this kind of you see how an inability to weatherize through kind of energy supply kind of exacerbates pre-existing health issues that people might have. But this risk, of pre-existing issues isn't only present in elderly populations either. So growing up close to industrial plants that have given them asthma, some of the people that I've interviewed reported that breathing becomes harder during heat waves too, especially when mold is factored in, which is developed because of, as Sarah was talking about, poor housing envelope. So you see this kind of interconnection between poor housing envelope, the creation of mold in these houses, and then intersecting with pre-existing health issues such as asthma, and this creating new kinds of risks, basically, when heat waves happen. And all of it can kind of be reduced to the matter of weatherization and poor housing quality, I think. So second, there's what might be called, what I'm calling maladaptation risk. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. Here, poor weatherization forces people to improvise in seeking to mitigate the effects of heat. But sometimes the steps that they take actually end up exposing them to new dangers. The most tragic case of what I'm calling maladaptation risk came in 2023 when a 17-year-old boy was found dead in his car, having resorted to using his air conditioning overnight after the landlord in his family's rental house, again, it comes back to kind of this rentier model, had failed to fix the house's air conditioning for months. This landlord was fined multiple times and still didn't replace the air conditioning. And I think that there's a kind of direct connection between lack of air conditioning here and the death of this boy, to be honest. And then thirdly, there's what might be called emergent risks. These are risks that are only now beginning to surface as poor housing stock and lack of weatherization capabilities intersects with increasingly hot temperatures. So I don't know how many of you know this, but Louisville is in a projected heat belt by 2030, I think it is. It's likely Louisville's likely to be subject to more than 30 days worth of 105 plus degrees Fahrenheit temperatures every year. And with that kind of meteorological change, we're seeing new kinds of risk emerge because with poor housing. So these kind of emergent risks, I think will only get worse if housing quality and things like utility burden remain the same as they are now. Just to give one example of this, I've begun to hear and read about standing water that's often found in common areas of large public housing facilities in Louisville and further afield as well. Obviously, standing water in hot weather attracts and is a kind of breeding ground for insects such as mosquitoes, while mosquito bites themselves might not be seen as such an important risk. Their ability to spread vector-borne diseases certainly is. And we've seen in places like Miami, insurance companies down in Miami are increasingly looking to underwrite public spaces by factoring in the risk of Zika, malaria, dengue disease, and West Nile virus as well. So actually, if poor housing conditions continue, if leaking pipes are able to produce standing water in common spaces in public houses, and if all of this intersects with increasing temperatures, you're really likely to see like a massive increase potentially in vector-borne diseases in Louisville, as well as across the country too. Yeah, so enough of that, and I'll hand over to Sarah to talk about policy recommendations.
Thank you. So I don't know about you all, but that's a lot of depressing information. It sometimes feels, especially with our current political climate, that there's not much that we can do to fix this. But MHC has come up with some recommendations that we think would be beneficial in moving forward the affordable housing and affordable utility conversation. The first is to improve water and energy use. So we suggest that we implement policies and programs to address at-risk housing stock. This includes creating a critical repair fund, a weatherization fund, also updating building codes, which is something that has been in the talks about this year. Building codes are still operating on 2009 standards, and we are trying to get that increased so that new houses that are built are already energy efficient once they have an owner inside them. The second is to streamline assistance. There are many people who either don't know the types of programs that are out there, or it's just overwhelming to keep up with 10 different applications for SNAP, for LIHEAP, for LIWOP, all of these different programs. It can be really overwhelming. So we recommend to create a one-stop shop for these applications so that people have one place that they can go, that they can access the support that they need, and not have to keep up with, 10 different organizations. The third is to reform policies. There are some policies that we believe that need to change to increase the access to affordable housing and affordable utilities. And a lot of those policies don't have stakeholder engagement within them. Something that we suggest is to create a low-income affordability collaborative. So a group of stakeholders who can advocate for things like energy efficiency, water efficiency, demand-side management, and use data to target people that would be beneficial, that would benefit from these programs. So something like this could look like a stakeholder group that gets together with a local utility to talk about different programs that they offer and provide experiences as being, a client-based service, so that they can, give a voice to people who are actually using these programs. The last is to collaborate. Something that we need, which was the driving force of this report, is Louisville-based data. Without data, without knowing who needs what support and where, we can't connect with them and get them connected to the resources that they need. So being able to share data with the utility organizations, with different client-based organizations, providing educational research, it's going to connect those in need to the right place. And that's where a lot of you all on the call come in. I recognize a lot of people on this call, and I know that a lot of our work overlaps. We as MHC are community connectors, so we want to make sure that our work isn't siloed, and that we are bringing everybody into the space so that we can work on affordable housing and affordable utilities together. Next slide. And I think that's the last of our slides. I think we're going to go into a Q&A now. But if you are interested in additional information or want to read that report about affordable utilities here in Louisville, I think the chat is disabled, so I can't put the link in there. But if you go to everyhomelou.org, which is on the screen here, it'll be on the front page. So you'll be able to access the article that way. I will turn it back over to Dr. Story to get us started with a Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I really so greatly appreciate that you both agreed to do this and also that you're doing this really critical research. So thanks everyone who has been here. And I know that you don't have access to the chat. And so we've got about 11 minutes until 1. And so I think what we'll do here is I should be able to turn people's microphones and at least that potentially also cameras on. So if you want to ask a question, you should be able to raise your hand using the raise function at the top of the screen, and there's a little hand. And so if anybody has a question they want to ask, please go ahead and raise your hand and I can turn or I can allow you to turn your microphone on so that you can ask that question. And in the meantime, I will continue to say words. And I also would be happy to ask some questions of you all if we don't have any from the audience. Okay, so I'll ask my question while people are pondering what their questions might be. I guess my question to you all is, how do you think that we can do a better job of connecting research that's being done in academic spaces and in community-led spaces like MHC? And I know that MHC has worked with a lot of different researchers, and obviously Nat, as a researcher, you're connected with organizations. But what would your advice be to folks on either side of that, either community-based organizations that are doing or would like to do research on this or other topics, or academics who'd like to work with community-based organizations or at least connect? How do you think we can go about doing that better or doing more of it?
I don't know. I'll go ahead and start, and Nat, if you'd like to jump in. I think it's extremely important. We have a lot of people who are client-based organizations, so they're working specifically with the client every single day. We have researchers like MHC, we do research. We don't specifically have client-based services, but we also like to reach out to people in research spaces, such as U of L or the University of Manchester. I think Dr. Heberly is on the call, and she was the writer for our State and Metropolitan Housing Report for many years. So it's working with different organizations. Now we're working with the Northern Kentucky University, and that also, it's important to us to include students in that conversation as well. So I believe the first thing that we want to do is just make sure that we're reaching out to the different organizations that may be doing similar work, like Nat is.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's at the same time as, finding these kind of mutual points of overlap is also important to acknowledge that different organizations, like different people, different roles in these organizations, people have different kinds of capacities and can take projects in kind of different but just as important kind of trajectories, to kind of expand the scope of research, but also hopefully, if there is enough collaboration, also create better kind of policy outcomes too. And I think, as academics, in terms of academia, it's really about, kind of problem-based inquiry, and starting off from, working from the kind of ground as well, rather than kind of working in a kind of abstract register and then kind of trying to thorough into a kind of case, but actually acknowledging the kind of problems that's that are rooted in on the ground, and then working with people within the kind of local spaces to do that actually. So I think probably a different kind of approach to doing academic research is probably required too. One that kind of thinks of community partners and organizations as primary to research rather than kind of any kind of secondary output or, thing to consider afterwards, after you've developed your research proposal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for that. I appreciate it. Looks like Kathy, who should be able to turn on a microphone already, has a question or a statement. Kathy.
Yeah, well, one of the things we have to work on is the land use plan, so that we take out the calcified racism of the, I mean, there's a lot of hate poured into that 174 pages. So that's local. That's something we can control. We have to have better lending so that even when people are middle class and Black, their ownership rate is so much lower than white households at that same income level. So we need to work on the things that we can control here. We have allies, and even the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce recognizes that housing is a critical issue. So we have some unlikely partners, and Kentucky Housing Corporation. But I also want to talk about everybody here buying at least one share of PPL, our utility company, to try and force demand side management money into this. Yeah, it's potatoes, it's small potatoes, but if we get enough small potatoes, we'll have a big potatoes, right? So ownership activism. And the other thing is that, Sarah knows my thing is that the utilities are racist. They collect a lot of money from the low income areas, and they support the high income white areas. And those high income white areas use the most electricity, but we keep their per kilowatt hour lower by putting it in the fee that we all have to pay. When you have thousands of apartments in a square mile in low income areas, all paying that fee, which artificially lowers the kilowatt hour, and you have these sparsely populated white affluent areas who are the biggest electricity users. And God bless, we don't have enough trees in the West End, but it means when we have storms, all the outages and all the repairs are in the White End. We are totally supporting, I call it the White End, the West End and the White End. So we need to take control of our own utilities, and not feel so helpless about it, and appear in front of the Public Service Commission. I really believe we have a lot of local control over small things, I admit. And the other thing is that so much of our electricity is generated by fossil fuels. I cannot, in good conscience, tell people to switch from gas to electricity because it's so much more expensive and it's generated by fossil fuels anyway. So if you're low income, I would tell you, yes, stick with your gas because your gas bill is going to be lower than your electric bill, and your electricity is generated by fossil fuels here in Kentucky. So that's a lot I give out, but there's so much local control, and I'll be done.
Thanks so much for that, Kathy. We just got a couple of minutes, so I want to let Nat and Sarah see if they have any response to that. But if anyone else wants to ask a question, just go ahead and raise your hand in Teams, and then I can turn on your mic for a last moment. But barring that, I want to hand over to Nat and Sarah to respond or to think further about that.
Yeah, I can just respond really quickly, Sarah, just before handing over. I mean, I think Kathy raises some massively kind of important points. One of the things which I talk about in the paper related to this presentation is that Black ownership of homes is basically half of what it is for white people in Louisville. So I mean, Black home ownership stands at around 38%, and white ownership is about 70. So and you can and this is something that's just kind of developed over time as well. On the kind of PPL thing, I think that's massively kind of important. And you picked up, precisely kind of why it's so important with the future demands on energy that Louisville's going to face, particularly with the emergence of data centers and AI, which is something that the federal government is like going gung ho on with complete indifference to any sustainability like causes, obviously, as you might imagine, from the current administration. And then just another thing about that is racism isn't only explicitly embedded in these kind of policy documents like land use, but it's also kind of prevalent in increasing kind of state and federal indifference to energy burdens that people in places like West Louisville are facing. So, I mean, Sarah will know way more about this than I do, but light heap for a lot of people during heat waves and snowstorms will have been literally a lifesaver, and that's now been completely disbanded. So there is a kind of like I don't really like there's a racialized violence behind indifference by cutting these by cutting these massive government programs. And I'll leave it there because I don't want to take up too much time, Sarah. But I really liked your comments, Kathy.
Yes. I know we have just about a minute left, so I think I'll leave us with a call to action that speaks a lot to what Kathy was mentioning earlier about local control. There are things that we can do as a community. One of those being sending comments to the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission, they oversee the utilities, most utilities here in Kentucky, including LG&E and KU. There's many cases that are going on right now at the Public Service Commission, but there is always a way that you can get involved within this process. If you are an LG&E or KU customer, you can simply email the Public Service Commission what you think about a certain case, and we have the information for all the cases on our website. But it's very simple. They're asking for our opinions. And if we don't say how we feel as customers, then the only side that they're hearing is the utility side of the conversation. So if, we send an email saying, hey, we need XYZ, or, raising rates is going to make it unaffordable for me to, afford my grocery bill every month. The Public Service Commission is looking for information like that when making a decision. So just check ABI, Metropolitan Housing Coalition, check all of our work, check out our websites. We'll have call to actions on things that you can do as a community. Thank you.
Thanks so much to you both. We're here at 101, so we are going to wrap up and let folks head on to the next things in their day. I just want to say thanks to all of you faceless and voiceless people in the crowd who joined us here today. Again, learning experience with webinars. Apologies we didn't have the chat, but very glad you all were here. And I just wanted to say, if anyone is interested in following up with Nat or Sarah and didn't see their emails on that very first slide at the start, you're welcome to email me, and I would be happy to connect you, or I think probably the magic of the internet would lead you to their email addresses relatively easily on their institutional homepages. So thank you both so very much. I really, I will just give my applause here and say how much I appreciate both of you and the work that you're doing, and then also in the spirit with which you do it and share that work. And then thanks to everyone who joined us, and wish everyone a good day wherever that happens to take you and wherever you happen to be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.